Let's go back to Centre now, take you live there, where the Judicial Service Commission is currently at lunch. And they are going to be coming back at about 3 o'clock. My colleague Heidi Giokos, of course, in there, tracking the story since Monday. Good afternoon to you, Heidi, at this lunch break. Well, Justice Raymond Zondo, the acting Chief Justice, now today you're facing questions on the other side, so to speak, where he usually is. How has it been going?
I must say it has been going reasonably well. I think everybody has posed the necessary questions to Acting Chief Justice Raymond Zondo. We had been expecting some kind of tension with regards to questions posed to him, especially around how he handled former President Jacob Zuma not wanting to attend or testify at the state capture inquiry. But he's been very stern in his responses, especially in the decisions that he took and why he decided to do what he did. He went into detail, Bradan, with regards to when he was asked to actually chair the State Capture Commission of Inquiry. He says he was asked by then Chief Justice Mogoeng, as a retired judge, had informed the Chief Justice that he would not be available to chair the State Capture of Inquiry. And he said, as the Deputy Chief Justice of the Constitutional Court and being second in the judiciary, he said it was his duty to do this. He said he knew from the beginning that he would make many enemies and he knew that many people would not like him. But he said he had to take on that responsibility, and he knew that it would be an enormous task. But coming with being a chairperson of a state capture inquiry, he said he's been threatened, as well as his family. They have been threatened. His security has been ramped up, especially because of the threats coming in as him being the chairperson of the state capture inquiry. But he says what was also very apparent was during the July unrest last year, judges had been targeted and threatened, and many judges had actually informed the judiciary that they were very worried and they were threatened, and of course security was ramped up. So I think he's touched on a number of things. It's been quite a long morning moving into the afternoon, as he is quite lengthy in his answers, but he says he needs to provide the necessary context and understanding as to why he answers the way he does.
Yeah, but I mean, from an administrative side, he also touched on the fact that the courts are facing infrastructure challenges, because he believes that if those are sorted, access to justice would be improved.
Yes, exactly. And it's quite interesting, Bradan, that almost every single candidate since Tuesday, Justice Madlanga, Justice Meyer and Justice Mlambo yesterday, and now today Acting Chief Justice Raymond Zondo, they have all touched on the poor state of the judiciary and the courts specifically, especially the magistrates' courts. And hopefully the Minister of Justice, Ronald Lamola, who is also here in this room as one of the commissioners, is hearing this, because there are serious budget constraints to all of this. And it, at the end of the day, affects access to justice, because when you have an extremely small courtroom and people working on top of each other, it becomes very difficult. That's been highlighted. The fact that sometimes lifts don't work. I know, especially in the Johannesburg High Court, it is a massive problem. You have over 8 floors, and sometimes the lifts don't work. How are people supposed to get up there? There's no space for parking. Magistrates have to fight for parking spaces with the accused, so that can become quite awkward and difficult at times. Recording systems aren't working. He's touched on the fact that there needs to be modernization and innovation in the courtrooms to speed up the processes and to make courts more efficient, but also accessibility for every individual that wants access to the court system in this country. So he's definitely touched on some important issues around the state of our courts in this country, be it high courts or magistrate courts. And he says if he becomes Chief Justice of the Constitutional Court, he will make sure that that is top priority to try and deal with and solve as quickly as possible.
Yeah, he also touched on that issues about the numbers of justices who are sitting at the Concord. I mean, right from Justice Madanga on Tuesday, he was not so sure about the quorum of 8. He thought maybe 7, maybe 9. And then we had Justice Maya saying maybe 15 justices. And today, Raymond Zondo making a very controversial one, saying even 3 justices can sit on a matter, depending on its type.
Yes, and the reason why he touched on this, Bradan, is because he says that sometimes it becomes very difficult when you have, for example, 11 justices or 8 or 9 justices on one particular matter, when sometimes it's not needed to have so many on one particular matter. Sometimes it might just be necessary to have 3 of them on a specific matter and delivering judgment, while the others can then work on another matter and move their attention to a matter that doesn't necessarily require 11 justices on one particular matter. And this speaks to the massive problem in delays of court cases actually being heard and judgments being delivered. For example, we've heard judgments being reserved for almost 2 years. That is a huge problem. That is the wheels of justice turning very slowly. How does somebody wait for a judgment to be delivered for almost 2 years? And it actually reminds me of the Tulsi twins matter that's actually going to be heard on this coming Monday, where it's been in the courts for 5 years. How can a matter be in court for 5 years with no trial? So this is exactly why Acting Chief Justice Raymond Zondo has spoken about how perhaps there should be a rethink and a relook at how many justices actually sit on the bench and focus on one particular matter when attention and responsibilities can actually be diverted where applicable.
Yeah, and interestingly, he didn't escape the question about how would he, if he was successful to getting this job of Chief Justice permanently, how would he juggle all the tasks that might come out of the state capture report if there were matters of legal reviews, and would that not eat into his time, especially because in terms of the law, he's only got about 3 or so years left in terms of his 12-year tenure as a constitutional court judge.
Exactly, and he was actually asked the question as to how exactly this commission should take the fact that he is the chairperson of the state capture inquiry. His report is expected to be released in different parts, and one part is most certainly going to focus on the kind of role, if at all, President Cyril Ramaphosa played while it's believed state capture was taking place in this country. So President Cyril Ramaphosa was deputy president at the time. He was also deputy president of the ruling party, the African National Congress. And should the president be implicated, is this at all going to impact the findings and the recommendations of that state capture report when it does, and if it does mention the president, given the fact that the president ultimately has the decision to decide who becomes the next Chief Justice of the Constitutional Court? And you have Acting Chief Justice Raymond Zondo saying that should not affect the decision at all, because if I do find anything, or if I don't, whether it's against President Cyril Ramaphosa or against former President Jacob Zuma, that should not be a consideration. He's been tasked to do the work of the State Capture Commission of Inquiry, and that's what he is going to do. And he's not going to allow the influence of the fact that the president makes the decision of who becomes a Chief Justice and what is going to ultimately come out of that report. So I think that was extremely important to be asked, so that there can be clarity around the two roles and whether or not there's going to be any kind of influence or conflict when that report is written and the current president needs to be mentioned.
Yeah, finally, Heidi, I know you're expecting this question because I've been asking it of you every single day since Tuesday. The sentiment in the room. There was that one moment where Justice Petse was asking Malema to change his tone, and Malema couldn't understand why. He said, I speak like this, and I was hoping, this is not maybe the beginning of things going a little bit haywire, but fortunately they did not. But the sentiment there today, I mean, ahead of this afternoon, it is going to be the last interview. Of course, we're heading into the last lap. We do know that the JSC will meet behind closed doors tomorrow, Saturday, to deliberate on all the 4 candidates. But today, so far, how's the mood?
I must say, Bradan, and I'm going to allude to what I said from Tuesday, it's got a lot to do with the kind of energy and personality in the room. The candidate is the acting Chief Justice of the country at the moment, and we've almost seen his energy throughout the state capture inquiry. So it's been very similar, very calm, very reserved, very thought out in terms of his answers. But the point you mentioned where Commissioner Julius Malema was asked to moderate the tone of his voice, I think we all literally looked up and thought, what is going to happen now, because it became quite tense. But it was quickly diffused after Commissioner Malema explained this is how he speaks and he doesn't understand why he must moderate the tone of his voice. And soon after that it became quite relaxed in the room. I think that's actually what broke the ice, because then afterwards there were jokes that were being made, and you actually saw commissioners trying to engage in a more friendly manner with Acting Chief Justice Raymond Zondo. But I must say, the explosions and the fireworks that we were expecting or we thought were going to happen, it hasn't happened as yet. Maybe after lunch, when the tummies are full, there might be a different atmosphere in the air. But for now, it hasn't been as explosive as we thought.
Let's hope not, because they have a huge responsibility, and the country is watching. The world is watching this process, because for the first time we have 4 candidates vying for the top position of Chief Justice and being interviewed in public after the first ever public nomination of candidates last year, when the president opened up the space and veered away from the historic procedures and stuff like, which is a good thing, I guess, in terms of transparency. So we will know who is our Chief Justice before they take the seat. Heidi, you're going to have to go and grab a bite as well very quickly before 3 o'clock. Thank you very much for that update and just giving us a sense of what's happening there in the room and your highlights as well.